Thank you very much. So as the title suggests, we're here to learn about the changes that were made to EC2 Spot toward the end of last year at reInvent, and deep dive into the change to how you can access capacity, how the price mechanism works for Spot, and then finally instance hibernation. So what are we going to do? We'll first begin with a crash course on Spot instances, what they are and how you can think about using them. And then we're going to dive into each of these new features and functionality individually, hibernation, the new Spot pricing model, and then how Spot is now available via RunInstances. So first and foremost, we have multiple different purchasing options or consumption models for EC2 instances. There's on-demand, which is fantastic for spiky workloads or applications that are still being developed. Once you get an instance, you pay the bill, and that instance is yours until you choose to turn it off and stop paying for it. Then there's reserved instances. Reserved instances are a fantastic way to reserve capacity or receive a significant discount off workloads that are predictable or steady state. And then finally, Spot instances, what we're here to focus on today, obviously close to my heart as the Spot product manager. Spot instances are fantastic for fault-tolerant, instance-flexible, or time-insensitive workloads. We'll talk a little bit more about that throughout today's presentation. So, what is Spot? Spot is unused EC2 capacity, but it's important when you think about what is unused or spare capacity to put it in perspective at AWS scale. AWS has over 1 million active customers in over 190 countries, supporting virtually any workload that you could possibly want to run. So, in other words, there's enough for everyone, plenty to go around. And that's why, an example, when you think about the spare capacity at AWS, think about it as though the spare pizza you might have left over if you tried to share this with your family. Another way to think about this or to put it in perspective is now that, every week, AWS customers are using more Spot capacity, more Spot instances than customers were using in the average week in 2012 for all of Amazon EC2 instances. So again, that's what's being used. There's plenty more unused capacity for you to capitalize on. So as I said, Spot instances are spare on-demand capacity. And there's a couple of simple rules in how you can access and use that capacity. So first and foremost, the price of compute changes slowly based on supply and demand. Supply is unused on-demand capacity, and then demand is obviously customers like yourselves that want to use Spot instances. The price changes infrequently based on supply and demand of spare capacity, but it's using a longer history. It's not looking at supply and demand right now. It's looking at the supply and demand of capacity over a longer period of time. And then the second rule is you just request capacity when you need it. You pay the current going rate. And when we need that capacity back, we'll give you a 2-minute warning for you to wrap up your work or checkpoint or do whatever you can do in 2 minutes. And then we take that instance back off you. And the trade-off that you get for allowing us to take that instance back off you within a 2-minute warning is that typically Spot instances are 50 to 90% less than an on-demand instances. And so, what could you do with a 50 to 90% discount? First and foremost, you could increase your compute capacity by 2 to 10x while paying the same amount. So potentially doing workloads and applications that are otherwise cost prohibitive, or obviously accelerating your results so that you can actually get the answers faster. Another way to think about it is to run the same amount and just save 50 to 90%. So they do the same amount of work and save up to 90% off what you might be paying with on-demand. Or, of course, you can do a combination. There are some workloads that can benefit from having extra capacity. There are some workloads where you cannot benefit from adding additional capacity. And oftentimes within a single company or a single AWS user, you might have both workloads. So, one or the other or both. So one of the most important things to understand about Spot and accessing Spot is actually just about how capacity is made available for customers. And so I have a very simple sort of, simple, it might not look simple right now, but I'm trying to give you a sort of simple view as to how capacity is made available for Spot customers. And so here we're looking at the Northern California region. Within a region, hopefully you're aware that we often have multiple availability zones. An availability zone is a data center or cluster of data centers that are geographically redundant from other availability zones. And so most people can work out pretty quickly, well, spare capacity, the amount of spare capacity is obviously not possible to be shared across availability zones. So they have different capacity pools. Similarly, most customers can work out really quickly that the M4 and the D2 have different Intel chipsets, different CPU to memory ratios. And so similarly, we cannot share capacity across these different instance families. A little bit less obvious is sort of the third vector of how capacity is made available, which is every different size within each family is also completely separate from each other when it comes to spot capacity. So it means a different spot price and a different chance of us actually taking that instance back off you and giving you that 2-minute warning. And so you might have heard somebody say at a point in time, there wasn't any spot capacity, or we ran out of spot capacity. That actually doesn't happen. That never happens. What does happen is every now and then, the R4 2 extra large in availability zone A in the Northern Californian region might run out of capacity. And so we might have to reject a request for spot instances, or we might have to start reclaiming some instances. And so the point here is that there is a lot of spot capacity. There are actually hundreds of spot capacity pools in every single region around the world. And so we don't run out of spot capacity. And in fact, if you can begin to harness the fact that there are all of these different options within every region, you can become a very powerful spot user and begin even using spot in production. So you can think about saving up to 90% and running production workloads if you can harness the instance flexibility concept. So obviously, again, people think, well, spare capacity, what does that really mean? How much is there? What's the opportunity? How much should I invest to start using? So I've already shared this quote with you. This is a quote we shared at the beginning of 2016, where, on the average week, AWS customers are using more compute capacity via EC2 spot instances than customers were using in the average week in 2012 for all of EC2 instances. Another way to think about this, which I really like, is a case study, an actual workload that Clemson University ran last year, where in a single region, they were able to scale up to over 1 million concurrent vCPUs using spot instances. They got over a 70-odd% discount versus on-demand, and were actually able to do genuine science using these spot instances at that scale. So again, this is what's being used. There is a lot of spot instances being used, but there is a lot more unused capacity for you to capitalize on as a spot customer. Here gives you an idea. Clemson is an organization that was able to harness different instances. So on the left-hand side, we can see how they scaled up to over 1 million concurrent vCPUs. And on the right-hand side, the pie graph, you can see the combination of different instances that was used to reach this scale. And so, not only by using different instances are you able to achieve, incredibly large scale, it also means that, if we need to take any capacity back, obviously it's going to be isolated to specific instances of specific sizes in specific zones. And so that's how you can actually build an application that can use Spot as a component for production. And so I'm going to reiterate this one last point, capacity and Spot pools and how it works. Each instance family of each instance size in every availability zone, in every region, is a separate pool of capacity and therefore a separate spot pool. I'm going to use those terms interchangeably, capacity pool and spot pool. I'm talking about the same thing. One thing, the reason I really like sort of showing this slide is this is really real data from a couple of years ago now, where a customer that's used to running on demand would say, hey, I run the C4 4 extra large, and that's the instance that works for me, and I'm not instance flexible. But if you actually see in availability zone 2B here, the C4 8 extra large at this point in time was actually cheaper than the C4 4 extra large. And so whenever a customer starts exploring and thinking about Spot, I talk about instance diversity and being instance flexible a lot. And that's because of opportunities like these, where you might be able to get twice the CPU, twice the memory, twice the network performance, and actually pay less. As you can see here, 30 cents for a 4XL or 27 cents for an 8XL. So again, when it comes to thinking about Spot, you do need to change the way you think about capacity and approach it with the aim of being instance flexible wherever possible. And be aware that being instance flexible could mean that you actually get a bigger instance, but you pay less. All right, so we've done a crash course on Spot instances. Hopefully you've learned something there. Now I want to get into everything that we changed toward the end of last year that we launched at reInvent. So first and foremost, we launched a new Spot pricing model, as I mentioned. Based on customer feedback, we're seeking to deliver low, predictable prices for Spot instances. Secondarily, a lot of customers historically would spend a lot of time focused on what is the perfect bid for Spot instances. And the reality was, almost all of the time, the best bid for customers was just bidding the on-demand price. And so we've eliminated the necessity to bid. And in fact, if you don't bid, we commit that you'll never pay more than the on-demand price. And so that's a drastic simplification for customers. You don't even need to think about bidding anymore. You just request capacity and pay the current going rate. We also added support for Spot instances via RunInstances. If you've used on-demand instances, either directly or indirectly, you've used the RunInstances API. And so no longer do you need to learn a new set of APIs to use Spot instances. Now you can use the same API that you use for on-demand instances and get all of the same features and functionality that you'd get when launching an on-demand instance. And then finally, really exciting, we added the ability to stop and start Spot instances midway through last year. And at reInvent, we launched the ability to actually hibernate instances, which is a fantastic improvement for customers and significantly reduces the architectural work necessary to adopt Spot instances. So first and foremost, as I said at the beginning of last year, we added pause and resume for Spot instances, a stop and start, I should say. And then at reInvent, we added the ability to actually hibernate an instance. So what does that mean to hibernate an instance? It's very similar to the experience you have when you shut your laptop lid and then you open it up later on. So now as a Spot customer, what you're able to do is actually say, instead of terminating my instance when you need to reclaim it, actually just hibernate the instance. So flush memory to disk, shut the laptop lid, and then when there's capacity available again, we'll just restart that instance for you, back in the same state it was before we hibernated the instance. So first, let's talk about stop start and how that works. It's available for all EBS-backed instances. It doesn't matter what operating system or instance type you're using. We support the ability to stop and start. And so think of it very similar to how you can stop an on-demand instance. But in this case, you actually tell us when you request a Spot instance, hey, instead of terminating me, just put me into the stop state. So very similar. And then when there's capacity available, we will automatically start that instance up for you again. So you can't tell us to stop the instance midway through. When you launch the instance, you tell us instead of terminating it, just stop me and then start me again when capacity is available. There's no additional charge for this. Just like an on-demand instance, you pay for the storage, the EBS storage that sits around while the instance is stopped. You stop paying for the actual instance fee when it's in a stop state. So use cases, workloads that need lengthy setup processes. Maybe there's a lot of specific information you're putting into the instance. Maybe you're at the process of maybe hard coding an IP address. Don't recommend it for most cases, but if you have that, stop start's going to help you persist that information on the instance. Also, applications modifying data in storage over time. Again, instead of us terminating the instance and blowing away that storage, you're able to keep it. And so obviously a use case we're seeing is also workstations. So again, it's not like shutting your laptop lid here. It's more like actually turning the computer off entirely and then starting it again. So you won't have the memory flushed to disk, but all of that information on disk will remain there, and that instance will just start again when capacity is available. Hibernate and resume. I'm really excited about Hibernate because, as I said earlier, customers can now adopt Spot, start saving up to 90% without having to re-architect, without even potentially having to think about what do I do if an instance is reclaimed and I'm given that 2-minute warning. This one is available for EBS-backed instances only. Again, like stop, start, you need to use persistent requests. Couple of simple rules, right? Your disk needs to be greater than the memory on the instance. Otherwise, we won't have enough room to flush that memory to disk. And just like stop start, there is no additional charge. You just pay for the storage. Just like a stopped instance, you do not pay for the EC2 instance fee when an instance is in a hibernated state. So truly, if you want to understand what the experience of Hibernate is like, take a moment, maybe at the end of this, to shut your laptop lid and then reopen it again. There are some limitations when it comes to Hibernate right now. So it's available for C3, C4, M4, R3, and the R4 instance types. And just a couple of days ago, we actually launched support for C5 and M5 as well. At the moment, we only support instances with less than 100 gigabytes of memory. And as I said, EBS volume must be greater than the size of memory. We support 3 operating systems today, something we obviously continue to invest in to expand support. But right now, we support Amazon Linux, Ubuntu, and Windows. You can either use one of our pre-built UMIs that has the agent installed, or you can go and install the agent yourself on your own UMI. So what does the agent do? It's actually really simple. It checks that you've got the required operating system and kernel to support hibernation. It checks space and swap file. And really, then it just listens for the instance termination notification, or better phrase, really, it's the instance interruption notification now. Because obviously we won't be terminating you, we'll be putting you into a hibernated state. And then we just call the operating supported hibernate command. And so if you're a customer that's running on-demand instances today and you'd like the ability to hibernate, you could actually go ahead and use this functionality just by calling the operating supported hibernate command for those supported operating systems. Use cases, obviously long-running tasks, workloads where you don't have checkpointing, or an ability to restart a job from midway through. Fantastic use case for Hibernate. No need to re-architect, no need to build hibernation, just use no need to build checkpointing, just use hibernation. Obviously, high-performance computing workloads is another use case that might be fantastic here, where, again, you might be relying on third-party software, so you can't do checkpointing, or you have a long-running job. You can use hibernation so that you don't have to re-architect right now. And then finally, any application that keeps a lot of, sort of state or cache in memory, this could drastically reduce the complexity of dealing with instances being reclaimed. Very excited about Hibernate. And Caltech's been a user of Spot instances for a very long time. And Glenn Batch, their Senior Director for Academic Computing Services, actually said with Hibernate, they'll be able to migrate even more workloads to Spot. Right, so Caltech is seeing this as an opportunity for them to start saving 90% now without the complexity of having to re-architect an application to deal with an instance being reclaimed. Okay, Spot on Run Instances, another big launch for us at reInvent, where you no longer need to use a different API. So if you're running on-demand instances today and you're calling Run Instances, it's now as simple as dropping in that instance market option, market type equals Spot, and we would automatically just start launching Spot instances for you. So if you're a Spot customer and you've been hanging out and waiting for something like tag on create, as an example, what this will allow you to do is start getting tag on create for Spot instances right off the bat. And so there's a couple of major benefits here. One, it's a synchronous API. If we're going to get you Spot capacity, we're going to return synchronously the instance ID, just like you'd get for an on-demand instance. Second, we get all of the functionality that's added to on-demand almost immediately, straight out of the gate. So tag on create is available via Run Instances for Spot instances today. And then third and foremost, and this is a really important one, if you're a user that is reliant upon a third-party system to launch instances that doesn't support Spot today, because they haven't had the time or chance to actually integrate with a third party, with another API, with a Spot API, well, now you don't need to use a different API. So you can say to your third-party vendor, hey, please add this flag, and we can start launching Spot instances today. Also notice no bid price or max price here. So now no need to specify a max price at all if you don't want. As you can see here, you can just request. And as I said earlier, you'll never be charged more than the on-demand price if you don't actually give us a bid price. So as I said, now Spot can be integrated with more third-party services even easier than it had historically. But honestly, there is a huge amount of support for Spot instances already, both across the AWS platform and our third-party partners. Whether you're using Jenkins or Bamboo, Mesos or Kubernetes, Spot is available for you to use today. And we're excited that Run Instances is going to make third-party partners and services. It's going to be even easier for them to integrate and provide a Spot experience for you. All right, on to the new pricing model. probably the largest change that we made at reInvent, and one of the ones that we are really excited about how this has made it even easier for customers to begin saving up to 90%. So first and foremost, one of the major aims of the new pricing model was to deliver for customers low, predictable prices. And then the other big piece, as I mentioned earlier, is eliminating the need to actually bid on instances. A lot of customers would invest a significant amount of time, trying to predict spot prices and also trying to predict what was the most appropriate bid. Even though what we found was time and time again, one of the optimal bid in almost every scenario was just bidding the on-demand price. And customers were consistently seeing, 80 to 85% discounts on spot instances. But it was always hard to predict, particularly when getting started with spot instances. And that was what we aimed to solve here with a new spot pricing model. So as you can see here, this is when we launched the new smooth pricing model. So up until November 29, the prices would fluctuate. As you can see, they could potentially go up and even exceed the on-demand price. When we launched the new spot pricing model, prices have become significantly more predictable and the prices change significantly less frequently. We continue to use supply and demand to determine prices, but instead of looking at supply and demand right now, we're looking at supply and demand for capacity over a longer period of time. So what does it mean? First and foremost, more reliable spot prices. Prices change less frequently, and whether that means it's easy for you to explain to the business owners what spot is and what you're likely to pay at the end of the month, or whether it's actually just something that gives you more confidence to begin using spot instances, you can now be more confident of what the price you're really going to pay when you launch an instance. No bidding required. As I said, you can still choose to bid, but I'd encourage you to think about bidding as just setting a maximum price now, because that's really what you're doing. You can set the maximum price you're willing to pay, and if the price ever did exceed that, we would give you a 2-minute warning and take that instance off you. If you choose not to set a max price, which a lot of customers are beginning to do, you'll never be charged more than the on-demand price. But the one other big point here, because prices are not going to change as dramatically as they used to, the way we reclaim instances has changed. So I'll give you 2 key scenarios on how to think about how you could potentially have an instance reclaimed under the new spot pricing model. So here we can see a customer that actually chose to set a max price slightly above the current going rate. And we can see at around sort of midway through December 1st, the market price began to exceed that maximum price that the customer set. So because you've said to us, I do not want to pay more than $1.38, when the market price exceeds $1.38, we're going to give you a 2-minute warning and we're going to take that instance back off you. For spot customers that have been using spot for a long time, this is probably very familiar. For you, very normal. On to scenario 2. In this scenario, we set our max price equal to the on-demand price, or maybe you didn't submit a max price at all, because as I mentioned, if you don't submit a max price, you'll never pay more than on demand. So in this scenario, even though the current going rate is significantly below the max price or the bid price you've submitted, that instance still could be reclaimed by AWS if we need a return capacity for on-demand customers. And so this is the big change when it comes to max price and how instances are reclaimed, which is now instances are reclaimed arbitrarily when we need to return them to on-demand customers. This also means that a spot customer can no longer cause an interruption for another spot customer. If there is no more capacity left, we're actually just going to say, sorry, there's no more capacity left right now. It doesn't matter if you increase your bid. A spot customer can no longer interrupt another spot customer. So as a fantastic user of AWS actually said, we've eliminated spot-on-spot crime. Now, the only reason we're going to take a spot instance off you is if we need to return that capacity for on-demand customers. So with spot instances, you'll never be charged more than your maximum price. And while your instance runs, you are going to be charged the spot price that's in effect for that period. So again, in this scenario, even if we bid $1.53 at the on-demand price, you would pay the blue line, 54 cents for that instance. Doesn't matter what you bid, doesn't matter if you don't bid or if you do bid, everybody pays the current going rate. A couple of quotes here from Spot customers. Load.me is a customer that runs huge big data processing workloads on Spot instances. And they've said that the new pricing model makes it even easier to acquire Spot capacity and helps them be able to predict what they're actually going to pay. So they're able to run even more workloads on Spot instances because of that confidence. Grail, a company that is really doing something fantastic. Their mission is to identify cancer early enough that it can be cured. So they have huge requirements for bursty compute workloads as they continue to research and make advancements in that field. And so again, for them, the new Spot pricing model gives them confidence that they can launch capacity and get low predictable prices. So hopefully, given these changes and launches, using Spot should have become even easier. If you don't want to re-architect your application, just use Hibernate. Now you no longer need to think about bidding or anything along those lines. And also there's no need to learn any new API. If you're using RunInstances today, add the Spot parameter and continue using RunInstances and getting all the functionality that you get for on-demand instances like tag on create. And then finally, low predictable prices. No need to try and work out the most intelligent bidding strategy. Just request capacity and we'll give it to you at the current going rate. Now we'll take some questions.